This is a part 2 to the Babel video that we did on people moving from Babel to West Africa, how Shem and the Shemmites quietly moved their community over a 900-year period from the flood down to Abraham. But this Eber, where we get the name Hebrew from, and the migration of all of Shem, not just Eber, because he was just one of Shem, yes, one of the early descendants, but all of Shem moving out to take over their ancestral lands towards West Africa and then down into most of Africa that we have today, where there are, between the Yoruba and the Bantu and the Igbo, there's like 1.3 billion people in Africa from those heritages. And we see from that tiny start of that family, that one family leaving out from the Tower of Babel a few hundred years after it was formed, we find 2,000 plus, some people think 3,000 languages, different language groups in Africa. Especially we're talking in the area that we'll call sub-Saharan Africa. I know that's not the right name, but Ethiopia area as it was anciently known. But having that almost 1,000 years before Abraham back again, we can see how the different groups, the Yoruba and Igbo and the Bantu and all the many different groups, then we can see how all the different languages, 2,000 to 3,000 languages, exploded from a common beginning. And it's fascinating. And more fascinating to me was the responses to the video in the comment section from all of you, especially in Africa, but I had people from Russia, people that are from Africa living in Russia, people over in the Americas, people everywhere. They were making great comments about this issue of the migration of the peoples and the 900 lost years and who the different peoples are. Because as we'll see as we get into this, there is definitely a lot of contention, if we want to call it, or angst between the different communities, between the Bantu, between the Igbo and the Yoruba. Some think they're the same, some think they're different, and the Bantu and who they are. And looking at the proto-languages where these different languages came from. But you didn't just watch the video, and I so much appreciate all that posted a comment, but you not just watched it, but you gave great comments, exceptional comments. And in this video today, I want to use those comments to go into part 2, and I'm going to actually put on screen the comments of many of the different people that watched the video. Not everybody, of course, I can't put all the comments up, but I've selected out some that sort of hit at the points that were generally made and some that are fairly interesting. I'll leave some of the really funny or interesting ones towards the end. But the key in this one is to use your comments, to look at your comments and comment on them and see if there is some commonality or some things we can learn just from the comments to this video. And it'll also take us much deeper into the subject itself. So this user here said, most of the tribes from West Africa, such as Yoruba, Igbo, Bandika, Ashanti, is a shine in the Bible and that kind of thing. And you can read the whole comment here. I'm not going to read through the whole thing. But you do get the idea that there are these mixed peoples, mixed groups, not mixed peoples, but let's say mixed groups that have come off of a common ancestor, but over thousands and thousands, we're talking almost 5,000 years, there have been great divisions. So he names a few of them here. He doesn't name the Bantu, for instance, clearly, but we'll get into that too. My answer to him was, I appreciate that you do believe Israel is scattered in Africa, because he's making the point that all of the Bantu, the 1.3 billion people that are either Bantu, Yoruba, or Igbo, and others in Africa, we call it sub-Saharan Africa, that they all are Israel. And when I did that video, maybe I didn't bring it out clearly enough, but when you place back the 900 years between Abraham and Shem, or the flood, that area, and then you add on another 400 years between Abraham and Moses coming out of Egypt, we're talking 1,400 years that the peoples in Africa were of Shem that were already expanding. Yes, we know that Abraham came from Shem, of course, and that's great. But he was just one of, who knows by that time. By the time we get down to, by the time we get through 1,000 years, there could easily have been 20, 30, 40, 10, who knows, but millions and millions of Shemites living in Africa just by the time Abraham came by, that it wasn't an empty land. Our Bible, with the shortened history that the Pharisees have given us, makes it look like there was just 200 years, basically, between the flood and Abraham. And I'm sorry that that's just crazy, crazy stuff. But anyway, and I went through that in the other video if you want to look into that. But the issue is, by having this 1,000 years back, 1,000 years, as I explained in the last video, is a long time. Think about America, went from 3 million to 360 million in 250 years. So 1,000 years is a very long time in history. And so by doing that, by hiding Shem, they've also hidden all the divisions of the groups that make up Shem. Because Shem wasn't just one people. As we know, when people came out from the fathers, you can see the different names if you look up the nations charts. You can see that from Noah came the 3 sons, of course, and from Shem, I believe it's 5. Anyway, as it goes down, each generation has all these kids, and they form their own communities and their own village elders. And as they expand out, I assume the languages change. And I think if you look into they call it proto-languages, but it means languages that came up from one source, a common source. Doesn't mean they're all the same. It's just that the linguists can trace them back to a common source. So let's say that common source is Shem. If we go all the way back to Shem, then we can see there's a one language group that came all the way down through all the Shemites, whether it be Bantu, Yoruba, Igbo, and all the different groups. They share a common tongue, a common language. And I think that is just absolutely fascinating to me. And that they can trace it, that's fascinating too. But that's how they get this 2,000 to 3,000 languages that are all related to a degree. They all know they came from a certain set of roots. But this issue of all of Bantu and all of Igbo and all of Yoruba being all Israel, I'm not saying it's not possible, but there were, like I said, millions and millions of Shemites who were not part of Abraham's seed, and yet they were of Shem's seed and followed Melchizedek and the other great leaders and elders of their villages and of their peoples. But to believe that they all came, that they somehow disappeared, and that 1,400 years later when Moses comes into the land, that his little group of 1.5 million or whatever they were, that they somehow displaced all the other Shemites that were already living in Africa, is just, I can't make my mind go around that. So then I have to think, okay, yes, I do believe some of Israel got scattered into some of the Bantu areas and into some of the Igbo areas and some of the Yoruba areas. But to say that all the people from all those areas all over Africa, they all go back to the 12 tribes, I find that just so hard to understand how we can think that way. We look at even Abraham, who had 12 sons or grandsons through Ishmael. They're in Africa too. And Esau, they're in Africa too. And that's before we even get to Jacob and the tribes. But like I said, if we go back 1,000 years to Shem and all his generations, all the way through to Melchizedek, and we look at people like Jethro, who was a Midianite, which probably came from the ancestry of Abraham, yet he wasn't part of the 12 tribes. But to think that all of the fathers, I'm not going to say our fathers because I'm not going to put myself in as an African, but all of the fathers of all of the people in Africa, at least in the sub-Saharan or the Shemite area, that their father is Abraham and not Shem, I find that perplexing. I find it, if I was Shem or Eber or Peleg or any of these people whose ancestors came through, but they weren't Abraham, and all my ancestors were looking back and going, oh no, I don't want you as my father. I want Abraham as my father, and I want to be part of the 12 tribes. Then I'd go like, what about me, right? I'm your ancestor. I just think if we put back those years, we could start to see Shem, that most of what's in Africa is Shem and Shemites mixed in with, I believe, yes, I do believe some of Israel is mixed in. But I believe if it's 1% or 2%, I'd be surprised. And maybe over time with intermarriages in, great. But I don't see Israel personally as ever being more than 5% of Africa, of the total land mass, that Israel was not a large, huge nation. In our minds, because we have the Bible, we think it was this all-encompassing huge nation. But once we put back those years, we can then see that there were millions and millions of people and already probably at least 1,000 different languages and cultures, which has then made 2,000 over time and then made 3,000 as they expanded. But Abraham was not living in a land with nobody else, nor was Moses when he came out. They didn't come out into an empty land. They had to conquer down through the Canaanites. And they were told not to take the lands of others, just the Canaanites, which I explained in the other video. But the issue is, we don't want to shortchange, or I don't want you to shortchange your ancestors. Now, do you have some of the blood of Israel? Possibly, of course. They were to be scattered throughout the whole world, and that means to me scattered among Shem as well. But does that make that all of Shem, the 1.3 billion that are alive today, are all Israel? No, I can't. I'm sorry, I can't go there. And I know it may be offensive to some, but I can't go there. I think your father you need to look to is beyond Abraham, beyond Melchizedek, back through Eber and Peleg and Shelah and all Canaan that we had taken away, back to Shem, and even back to Noah, back to Adam. I think if we look at the family as much larger than just Israel that we have the record from, I think that we could start to reclaim heritage. Because how can we say we're reclaiming heritage that we then say everybody is Israel? This great comment is from someone in South Africa. And they're saying, that we know, I thank you for letting us know that we did come from Central Africa or West Africa. We came down in a long time ago, but our ancestors did come down and settled in South Africa, as he said, to this very day. And I said, once you see the 900 years taken away from the time to travel from Shem to Abraham, there is time, a continuous slow migration. As you say, West Africa got too cramped and the people had to move south. And I think the green Sahara started to turn dry, that's my opinion. And that also pushed migration further south as well. The lands that were arable lands in today's Burkina Faso and Mali and up that way then became much more arid, and they couldn't sustain the people. So the people often move because of cultural things, but also climatic things. And I think that's ends up what happened here, is that we see this Bantu migration, that they went from there and peopled a good chunk of Africa. But remember, of course, that Bantu is not just one people. The colonizers made Bantu into like it's as if it's one people, but it's actually a language, where a language came from. And all the languages aren't the same at all, but it's sort of a grouping of languages. But by making Bantu a people, it's like there's only 3 groups, Yoruba, Igbo, and Bantu in Africa, in that whole area. And there's not. There's thousands and thousands of nation states, you want to call it, or small nations, or small groups, or languages, or countries before the English came in. There's all these groups over this huge landmass. And we can see that there's people that are maybe, I'm not sure with this user, but there's people that are of Ham in Africa. And they can ask, are you saying that Ham and Canaan have no connection? And I'm going like, of course they had connection. They live in the same continent. And if you go to a place like Kenya, there's people from Ham and there's people from Shem in the same country. And we'll get into that little post from someone else in a bit. Who did Joseph that we talk about in Egypt, Joseph in Egypt with the Pharaoh? Well, he married a Hamite woman through the line of Mizraim. And who did Moses marry? He married a Cushite. Yes, some people have said, well, Midian was from Abraham, and that's true, but Midian was living among the Cushite area. So I assume that Keturah and the wife of Jethro, and through the generations, they were intermarried with Cushites. So when Miriam got cursed, when Miriam got leprosy for complaining about Moses' wife, a Cushite, that Zipporah was a Cushite, it was just, again, one of these ethnic type things. But Moses, the greatest of all for most Hebrews, beyond Abraham, he married a Cushite woman. And then what about the other 2? That we don't know about the 12. We don't know about the 12 of the 12 tribes, but we do know about Judah and Simeon. They both married Canaanite women. Okay, so they married into Ham as well. I personally believe all 12 of the tribes married into Hamite women, even though they were from Shem, because of where they were living. And I know that may go against the grain for many, but go look up the wives of Esau, and then Judah, and Simeon, and Joseph that was sold into Egypt, and you'll see that they married Hamites. And as I said, they were living in Hamite area. So of course, they were probably of that persuasion. But his comment is excellent, right? There has always been some mixing between Ham and Shem. They live in the same continent. And migrations happen and peoples change and they intermarry and that type of thing. But yes, are there still Bantu speaking languages that have a little bit of Ham mixed in over time? Some groups probably do, and others are probably just Shemites. And other Hamite areas, maybe in Ethiopia, are more just all Hamites. But it is one continent, maybe not one people. The two language groups are very distinct between the Hamite and the Horn of Africa area and Southern Africa and West Africa. There are two different language groups, yes. But does that mean the people never intermarried? Well, we can see in the Bible they did intermarry. King Solomon was certainly good at intermarrying with his 1,000 wives and concubines. Or Jezebel, who was not of Israel, who she married into, I think it's King Ahab or something like that. But yeah, there was lots of intermarrying going on. This person said, let there be no doubt that the Bantu and West Africans are more related to each other than they are with anyone else in the world. They are both from this E1B1A. Although East Africans like Ugandans, Kenyans, and Tanzanians have Cushitic and Middle Eastern ancestry, they are more related to West African, blah, blah, blah. So I put this comment here, I answered him back, and I said, I just looked it up online on chat. And it says that a lot of the people that are in those areas are actually of the Bantu Niger-Congo family of languages. The Kikuyu, which some people believe are actually part of the Levites, Luhuya, Kalahin. The Kalahin, they say, is much more related to the Egyptian side, and Luo more to the West Nilotic or the Hamite area, and Kambo being Bantu. And please don't get, if you're from any of those tribes, please comment. If I could easily be wrong because this wasn't me. I just looked this up online. But the issue is that, yes, there are these peoples living among each other and together in the continent. This person, Princess, said, it's also interesting how, as an Ashanti, there's so much similarities in the West African culture and communities. We share so much with Nigerians, Cameroonians, and Congolese, etc. It genuinely does give one family when you look at it from a larger perspective. And I want to thank her so much, I assume it's a her, so much for this comment because, oh my gosh, it's so true. Once you step back from the little individual, little groups that we're in and start and you look back and look larger, expand the vision. And that, like I did when I did that video, we see Eber and the whole family leaving, 5 generations of elders leaving from the area of Ethiopia and coming across Africa and settling and farming and making different groups and spreading out. But once you can start to see this huge family, then the perspective can change. Then, because in the comments there were certainly some pretty angry comments between Igbo and Yoruba people and some Bantu a bit, but I loved her comment that yes, we can start to see from a larger perspective, and then I believe as one goes and starts to see larger, they can start to see that all came from Noah in the end. We all came from Adam. And we don't have to be fighting one another. That doesn't mean that Abraham and they had a role that has been given to them in the covenant of Abraham or with the covenant that Abraham got for the world. Yes, of course, but that's different. We're talking about family. The family, the 12 were only just teeny small part of the family of Shem. Teeny small part. And then if we look at Ham and Japheth, well, that's a huge family. Yes, long time ago, but it is a huge family. And then you see this other person said, not true, definitely not with Nigeria. Ashantis and Ghana as a whole share more in common with Togo, Ivory Coast, and Burkina Faso. And it's this kind of back and forth. I don't think that this person, not putting it down in any way, I'm just saying, she was saying, let's expand our perspective because I do see some things common in different areas. So she was saying, yes, this way. And the other comment was back, no, let's go back to small again. And I think if we look at the large, look up that Niger-Congo language family on your own. You will find that it encompasses all the Bantu, all the Igbo, all the Yoruba. So almost, 4/5 of the people that live in Africa come from one common language group, which means to me one common family. But yes, thousands of years ago, yes, but one common family. And then we can start to have some healing, I think, instead of all the disaster that's come from colonial rule. I'm not going to say my people because I didn't come from that group, but I'm Canadian. But we did enough bad things there, and between the British and the French and all of that. So nobody, I suppose, in this world is innocent that way. But the point is that we can start to heal and see that as family, that we are family. Here's another one. Eber is still there in eastern Nigeria. Over many centuries, they've called themselves different names: Igbo, Igbo, Eber, Igbo, and that kind of thing. And yes, you can see on the old maps, that there was a kingdom of Judah in the Ghana, in the West Africa area, in the Gold Coast, and a lot of slaves were taken from that area. That's very true. But I think if you look at the studies, one person said that about being Africa is it. Well, there's a lot of Africans that are over all through the Americas, and they aren't just from the Igbo, and they aren't just from Yoruba. They're from all the places. There's lots of Bantu, there's lots of Igbo, there's lots of Yoruba. So I just think we have to look larger at your people, because I think they have been taken all over the place. And this person got back and said, I am Igbo. I know firsthand the traditions. The entire Old Testament seems to have been copied from the Igbo tradition. Up to 80% of those taken to slavery during the transatlantic slave were Igbos. And that said, the slave merchants were asking specifically for Hebrew or Igbo slaves, and other Africans hunted them down. I'm going to do a video on that issue, but not yet. But the issue is we all see it from our position. There's others that are Yoruba who put down, it was our people that were all taken overseas. And there's lots of people in the Americas that go, no, I'm originally from Bantu, So just, if we can expand our perspective a little bit, right? And it doesn't mean that this person's wrong or anyone's wrong. But if we expand our vista a little bit, we can start to see. Because if you're interested, there's a Kurameo Awahu, I think his name is. He did a great video on the Inquisition and how peoples came down from Iberia or Spain, Portugal, down into this part of Africa, and then they were shipped overseas too. So it's a very complex thing. But if we can have grace for one another, and as the Messiah said, and treat each other kindly, and especially in my comment section, please comment all you like on all these things that we're going over. I love the comment. That's the only way I actually, from not being from Africa, that I really can learn, especially the detail that you as commenters bring to the video. It's amazing, right? It's like it's like having a sit down with the family in each little place. This person, Andrew, the Iwe, I hope I said that right, Iwe tribe is closely related to the Yoruba. However, the name is not Iwe or Uwe, it's Ebre, or something like that. And they are known as the Ebre because the Germans couldn't get the VR sound. So they started calling them Eve, but in W, it's more like the English V, which results in Yue. But the name Yue or Juve or Evre has something to do with crossing over or coming from a far place, which goes back to the name of Eber, which means crossing over. And I said, thanks, fantastic, thanks for that, especially about the crossing over. This viewer, that Signal, who's on a lot, and I appreciate all his comments, but he talks about more the whole issue of how now Africa's basically been hidden, other than Egypt, where they've made them all into Mediterranean people, not Africans, which is another lie. But hiding Meroe and hiding the greatness of Kush and hiding all the peoples and the colonial rule. But what that has done, and he talks about this Caleb of Aksum, which is over in Ethiopia, that he helping the Christians, but it's never brought up. Nothing about Africa generally is brought up. Even when I was a child and growing up and through school, we never studied anything about Africa. The only thing I knew about it really started to do with Nelson Mandela and South Africa and that type of thing. as I got older, I learned all about that. And I mean, it's sad, but fascinating. But I said to him, follow the money. He was talking about eugenics and that kind of thing. But I said, follow the money. Such crazy ideas come with colonial power, desire to control resources. So making all of Africa ham, which they did, right? Most people, if you ask most people in the US or Europe, ham, they'll just say, well, that's Africa, right? But that's actually Shem. And Africa, ham is there too. But they not just hide Shem, but they don't just hide Shem. No, they're not content with that. They made Shem into Ham, and then they made Ham into Canaan, because Canaan got cursed, not Ham. Very important to understand. Ham was not cursed, nor was Japheth. They 3 brothers kept the covenants. They were not cursed. They got their land inheritance and were part of the covenant with Noah. But Canaan was cursed, absolutely. But what the colonial powers did to, in my opinion, put down the, I'm not going to say Negro people, or the black African, or the African people, to put down the African people totally, is to make them all cohesive units. It's like making all these 1,000 different languages, you're all just Bantu. And all you guys are all Yoruba, and you guys are all Igbo, right? Even though it might not even have been their original names. But the issue is the colonial powers wanted to categorize people, and they all wanted them under Ham. And they didn't want them under Ham to be kind. They wanted to be under Ham because then they could take the Bible curse and say, oh, that was Ham, even though clearly the Bible says it was not. But they use that as a lie, and that's what everybody started to believe, which is just a complete falsehood. Why do they do this? The same as when they went into the Americas, especially in the U.S., but it doesn't matter. The Spaniards in South America, same thing, or in Mexico. It's the same thing. They wanted the resources, they wanted the land, so they would destroy the books the people already had, destroyed their history, destroyed a lot of their monuments, especially in Mexico, destroyed tons and tons of their temples and hid things away. And in Canada, they tried to integrate the native people into, the culture of Canada, I suppose, in harsh ways. But in the U.S., they just treaty, broken treaty, broken treaty, broken treaty, until the whole eastern part of the U.S. only has a couple of little tribes living there. And the tribes we do know about are all out in the West, where very few people ever lived anyway, because they were driven out there until they gave them the worst land they could possibly get and said, oh, that's Navajo land, or that's Sioux land, or whatever. But the true huge population of America, when the founding explorers came, they were very Ethiopian looking, as the explorers said. They thought they were Ethiopians, and you can look that up too. But the point being is they wanted the land, they wanted the money, so follow the money. Africa is one of the richest, if not the richest continent in the world for resources. So of course they're going to use whatever reason they can to make the people look like they are either cursed, or they're poor, or they're degenerate, or they have no language, no culture, when in reality the culture, while the English and the Gauls and the Nordic peoples and the Russians and everywhere else, while they were living in, I'm not going to say squalor, but they were living in very, very backwards ways thousands of years ago. We look at castles nowadays in Europe, but those are all 500, 1,000 year old. They're not even the Roman stuff is pretty much gone. There's only little bits left. All that we see in Europe is from Catholic Church onward, and that's fine. But to think that the Africans didn't have anything, that's why they won't allow any archaeological work to be done outside of Egypt. And when they did Egypt, they had reasons because they wanted some occult stuff from there. But they made all the pharaohs and turned all the people into Mediterranean white people, or at best Arabs. And they denied the true ancestry, which of course is Nubian and darker skinned people and melanated people that all the pharaohs were. But they denied that to push a narrative because they wanted the land. And because they wanted the land, they had to have the people subjugated. So again, follow the money. And I'll quickly put this one in. I'm trying to find out about Nigeria and the Igbo people. Can someone help me with books to buy? So you can see his handle there. And if anybody wants to send him comment, go for it. I thought this was an interesting comment because this is how much that mindset that we get that is hard to see. Even though I put the video and I thought it was fairly clear about the 900 years and about the expansion of the people across West Africa and why they couldn't go into Canaanite lands. But this person said, so why in scriptures does it use the word scattered in all directions when you're saying they went in one direction? And that's why the Bible, I'm not going to say it's poisoned our minds because that's a bad way of saying it, but the Bible, we see through a lens like this, through the Bible lens. But the Bible, as I said, from Moses, we're talking 1300 years from Shem. So the Bible and the scattering of the people way further down the line when Assyria took out the lost tribes and when Judah was taken by Babylonia and then by the Romans, those scatterings, those all happened within the last 3,000 years. But this video is about much, much earlier than that. And it's so hard for us to see it because we already have these ideas in our head that Abraham and all of that was right after the flood when it wasn't. And this same user made a nice comment here, and I appreciated that, but I made the point to her that even for me, I think we have to have patience with people, with white people, of course, but anyway, whether they're Chinese, Russian, Ethiopia, it doesn't matter. Where people are from different communities, to have patience, because it took me a while. It was only when I found about the secret society stuff and all that was going on in the world that I realized that Jerusalem was not the place that there's problems, right? So I learned that the history had been given by Rome, not just the books that have been tainted, but the history was super tainted. Once I started to see that, then it just came into my mind about the animals of the Bible. I'm going like, and I did a video on that a long time ago. And then I did one on Jesus being a black man. And even from some of the comments here, I see that even the modern world and the colonial powers have made, even within Africa, of the people of Shem and the Israelites that may have been mixed in there. But they have started to lose their heritage and their connection with their village elders and connection with the things that have held them for thousands of years together. Because once you start losing your language and you lose your elders and you lose your those things, it's very, very hard to ever get them back. I'll put a little plug in here because I'm going to do a video on just this issue of the language, because we don't think about the issue of Egypt, that Moses' people had been in Egypt for, 240 years. They were there. And if you take a generation, I'm in Mexico, if Mexican family leaves here and goes up and lives in some state in the U.S., their children will barely speak Spanish, and their grandchildren probably won't speak a word of Spanish. And I think it's the same thing. Yes, they were of Shem when they went inland, but what effect? We don't think about those effects. I'll put in this little plug for this user. Gave us some information on Yorubas, which was very good. You can take a look at this or screenshot it if it's interesting to you. He says that the Yorubas and the Igbo and Yoruba are fairly closely linked peoples, are still keeping most of the ancient Israelite culture alive. Here are the ancient Israelite cultures being practiced by Yorubas. And then he talks about naming babies, about how to deal with a brother's wife, how they pray, the festivals, the first fruit, the yam festivals, the dedication of children, using pigeons, the younger twin, that kind of thing. And so, again, I am not going to critique. Possibly all the Yoruba and Igbo are all from the 12 tribes. It's possible. I don't want to get into that. But what I want to say is that I don't believe all are. I believe it's a mixed, which is what Abraham's seed was promised, that they would be leaven, that they would mix in among the peoples. So the traditions can go in and be mixed in among the peoples. This user is talking about that we don't, the truth is coming out about Africa, and it really is, especially among African people themselves, but I'll lend my little voice as well. But this person down below brought out about the Pope and all that, and I'm going like, nah, don't trust anything there, I'm sorry. Don't trust, that's fleeing Babylon. The Pope can say what the Pope wants to say, or anyone else can say what they want to say. But they were the ones that did all this stuff. And it would take a humongous cleaning crew to clean up that church or any other church of all that's been done wrong, especially to the African people or the people that have come from any indigenous population. The church has been used as a tool, absolutely. Does that mean that every white churchgoer and every churchgoer wherever they are in the world is somehow, no. It just means the powers that be that ran these things, they used it as an agenda. So when they went into Africa, they used civilization, they call it, but really what they did is they broke down the ancient ties to the land and the people and their languages and substituted something else. They did the same in Mexico, which is why the whole country is Catholic, or in the US, which is why it's either Catholic or tons of Protestant groups that came over. But religion defines us. For me personally, I've stepped away from all religion, every one of them, even one that I quite liked and the people I liked, but I've stepped away from all of it about 3 or 4 years ago and will have nothing more to do with any of it. Because for me, that is coming out of Babylon. And I just want to say that doesn't mean I can't go. I go to church once in a while for something, but my heart isn't there at all. I can't even hardly listen to what's being taught. It's painful almost now. But that doesn't mean we can't associate with our friends in whatever church we are in. But when the Savior said, or when the Revelation says, come out of her, my people, be not partakers of her sins, it doesn't mean we have to go out into some mountain and live by ourselves, or we can't ever go to a church building, or we can't ever do this or that. But no, it's about our heart. Take the heart out of idolizing that religion and put the heart back on the Father. This person brought up the issue of, because there is these two traditions. One is that Melchizedek was Shem because of the short tradition of the Masoretic text or our Bibles, that false tradition, which I believe. And then there is the long tradition, which is the Septuagint. The Septuagint came about directly from Hebrew 250 years before Jesus. So it's a very old text. Yes, it's in Greek. But remember that the Hebrew, you can go look it up. The oldest Hebrew text is 1,000 years ago. There are nothing before that. And I said, yes, it's crucial because once you see the stolen people and the stolen years and everything stolen, everything hidden, okay, you can start to see. But remember that if you want to believe that Melchizedek is Shem, that's fine. Yes, some of the apocryphal stuff say that Shem is Melchizedek or Melchizedek is Shem. I don't believe that. I believe the Septuagint, that is the Bible that was used completely in Jesus' day. That's all the New Testament writers wrote from the Old Testament Septuagint. So I have to take that as, for me, that's my basis. Others may disagree. But the Septuagint says that Shem lived a long time, but he was long gone by the time Melchizedek came, long gone. I want to share this this person is married to someone from Uganda, Kenya area. And she's talking about the red dirt of that area, that they've been stealing the dirt and digging it up, right? He noticed that in the fruit growing areas in what they call the Galilee region, he said that the guide told him that there was a construction company from the state that helped build infrastructure in Uganda, including an airport, and that they noticed the soil was really fertile, so they took the soil back to the state, I guess to Israel, so that they could make, have better soil. And I said, I didn't know that. And she said, yeah, they took tons of soil from Kenya, shipment of soil. I'm a Kenyan, and we know that this is what they did. The soil is reddish brown because of iron and sometimes copper. The best soil is for coffee and tea. Right now, they got tired of shipping soil and are creating huge Jewish communities in Kenya instead. And they can call them Jewish, I'll call them Jewish religion communities, because they're not the seed of Shem that are coming down there. They are the seed of Japheth that follow the tradition of the Masoretes or of the rabbis of our day. But yes, so this land, Kenya and Uganda, it's quite well known. You can look it up. But before they decided to go to Palestine, the Zionists, were eyeing Uganda and Kenya to come, and the British were going to give them parcels of land. But now that they have lots of money, they just come down and buy up the land, And it says that the Gentiles will be walking over the land until the coming of the change in the future. Just because someone is Jewish by religion doesn't mean that they're not from the Russia, Ukraine, German area. That's their fathers. religion is religion. It's like, my religion can be one thing, but my father's can be from a different place. It's like some people that were Catholic then became Protestant, right? That doesn't mean that they changed their blood lineage. Whether my family is I can be from Japheth and be from, Catholic, Protestant, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox. I can be from any different religion. I could even join and become a Jewish person. That's fine. There's nothing I could do. So I'm not putting down any certain group. I'm just saying when we're looking at the promises, they come through the line of Shem and they come through Abraham as to these things in the last days. So the people being of a certain religion doesn't have made anything to do with the covenant of Abraham at all. Okay, just keep that. That's just a good thing to keep in mind. And yes, I'll say they're also buying up a lot of land in South Africa as well, and Thailand and different Ukraine as well. This comment here, I want to make just a clarification. Again, not a put down, but I just want to say, he says, I don't want any African to still call himself a Gentile in this awakening. We are Bantu or Israelite by DNA, not those other group from Ukraine area, okay, or the barren desert of the Middle East. And I think his point is well spoken in terms of, yes, which I just talked about. But the issue is, I will find fault a little bit with this saying that all Africans are DNA Bantu Israelites. And I don't believe that. I think that would be pretty easy to show is not the case. I think it's quite the opposite. All Israelites may be Bantu, Yoruba, or Igbo, but not all of them are from the 12 tribes. I'm just using logic, only logic. If there's 1,000 years before Abraham, and then there's another 300 or 400 years with Moses in Egypt, then the Bantu people were before that, and the Igbo people, and the Yoruba, possibly. Who knows? But just remember that the ancestors, these thousands of language groups, came from time, long time, and long before the 12 tribes. This comment is very good. He's talking about this Willem Bleek in the 1850s. He's the one that made the Bantu all Bantu, right? And again, he said it was for their hiding. It was the intent so they could drive the people by name, and we talked about this earlier. He says that Bantu or Bantu is our real name. But Bantu languages, as our Yoruba and Igbo languages, they go back to what? They go back to Shem. They don't go back, and I'm going to show that in a video, not this one, another. They don't go back to the language of Moses, because Moses' people lived where? In Egypt. So whatever language they had, it was not the same as the language groups that had fled the tower and were living safely esconded and hidden away in Africa, the Bantu, Yoruba, and Igbo. Yes, some words, of course, are common. Of course they are. But just remember who we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a people, the 12 tribes lived in Egypt for 200 years. That means they were basically speaking Egyptian. Now, did they keep some of their original language? I'm sure some few did, but I expect most spoke the language of Egypt when they came out of there. They certainly followed the calf, the golden calf, and that was the religion of Egypt. So I think they were pretty much Egyptian in many ways and had forgotten their fathers. I guess the main point of doing this comment video is for us to see, yes, there are some, I'm not going to say meanness, but some hurt among different groups within Africa I'm talking about. But that if we can go, like that one lady said, I think Princess or whatever, if we can start to see the bigger picture, right? It's like in the Hunger Games movie, and they say, Katniss, remember who the real enemy is. Instead of fighting among yourselves, remember who the true enemy is. Who's pulling the strings? That's who the enemy is. And while we're here fighting about who's Bantu or who's supreme, oh, no, the Bantu, we are Israel. No, Igbo, we're Israel. Oh, no, Yoruba, we're Israel. And then fighting amongst the different populations when Bantu makes up, what, like 1,500 or 1,000 or 1,500, 1,000 different languages within that language group. Well, which one of them is, when did their language develop? Instead of fighting about those things, I believe we should go back to our village elders who had the connection back to Shem, to Abraham, yes, but to Melchizedek. And stop thinking we are all of Abraham. We can all be of Abraham's heart like Melchizedek was of Shem's heart, in a sense, and Shem was of Noah's heart, and Noah was of Enoch's heart, and Enoch was of Adam's heart. We can all be of that heart and look back. This brings us back to Kenya quickly. I hate the divisions that people like Blake, this one we just mentioned, brought to Africa. Categorizing people that are Bantu and others as Nileites split families. As an example, in Luo, and that's in Kenya group, classified as Nileites, but are Hebrew, genetically closer to Bantu than to the Hamite group. And Kipsigis lumped together with other Kalahan tribes, yet they're totally different people. And that's what the colonizers did. You know, I'm not going to speak for them because my family weren't colonizers, but what they did to get the land, like I said earlier, they needed to lump people. And by lumping people, you can then push them down and subjugate them as a people. And it's a sad story of Africa. It's a sad story of all of Americas, India, China, wherever the colonizers went, they did the same. But one of the points I want to bring out is that look at what happened under Babylon. They did exactly the same thing as the colonizers. They took away their religion. They took away their languages. After Babylon, the people of Moses spoke Aramaic. So they lost their language. Most of them lost their religion. The Pharisees became following the snake, and the Talmud and all that stuff. They destroyed everything. So even though a few got back to the original land, they weren't ever the same again. They were following new traditions, the traditions of Babylon, more than the traditions of the scriptures. Those things, Assyria, when they took away the tribes, when people conquer other people, they take away their name, their heritage, all those things, the things that Deuteronomy 28 talks about. But that doesn't mean that the colonizers are right. They weren't. They were terrible people. The majority of them were brutal, as was the early, I won't say which church, but brutal. You know, we don't read about just how harsh. I mean, there were 10 groups when the Roman kingdom fell apart. There were 10 separate parts of Europe and into North Africa. And 3 of those groups wouldn't go, they were Arian, and they wouldn't go along with the little horn or the big church. And so these people, millions of them, were put to death. Like literally millions of people. We don't even hear about it. All 3 of those 10 communities were destroyed down to the last person. They were wiped out. Why? Because their beliefs were different than what the accepted norm is. So I think, like I said, I love that comment that said we have to start to think above. Think how a Heavenly Father, think about how He looks at all His children. Right? You know, and like I said in the Hunger Games, you know, remember who your really enemy is. The Savior met his enemy out in the desert, and He told him to get lost, get behind me. You know, I'm not having anything to do with you. You can offer me the world. You can tell me to get mad at everybody. You can do whatever you want, but I don't want anything you're offering. Sorry, get lost. You know, and that's what He said. But for most men, whether they be in Africa, leading in parts of Africa, leading in parts of Europe, leading in China, all over the world, they don't follow the same thing and aren't as excellent at, let's say, saying no to the tempter or the adversary. This person made a great comment. Of course, he said it was a great video, and I appreciate that. But he said, "My entire community is of Shem, and we have known this for years. And thank you for saying that you're from Shem and not saying no, we're Israel. That is a problem, right?" And I said, I feel more for Shem, that's been lost and hidden and denigrated and made into a disappeared people, than I feel for the 12 tribes. Shem was just hidden away, and so all we talk about now is just this one small little chunk of Shem, and consider them to be all of Shem. It's like, you're gone, you're disappeared, and if you're not of the 12 tribes, you're nothing. And I don't believe that. I believe, as I said in another video, Ham, you've got to love Ham. The Ham Pharaoh saved Israel alive. He elevated Joseph, loved Joseph, and elevated him to number 2 position. Yes, other pharaohs became wicked after him, but that Pharaoh was a righteous man, and he was of Ham. And Joseph's wife was a righteous woman, and she was of Ham. And then Moses' wife, she was a super righteous woman. more righteous sometimes than Moses was. Just look at the circumcision issue. And she helped Moses to be Moses, like every wife helps their husband to be more. And then we look at Judah marrying into Canaan, and Simeon and the others. It's about our hearts, about who we follow, who we seek to follow. I said I feel more for Shem. I do. When I do these videos, I'm not, in a sense, trying to rescue Shem. When I did this video on Shem in West Africa, I wasn't doing it to say, there's Israel in West Africa. I was saying, there's Shem in West Africa, hidden away, lost to history, while all we focus on is the 12 tribes. And I said, thank you so much for letting me know that you're of Shem, because Shem has been steady. You can, as you know, that are watching from Africa, your fathers and your fathers' fathers and fathers have kept traditions down forever, just as the Hamites kept the Septuagint and the Ethiopian Bible alive for 2,000 years, while Israel was rebelling and cast out and all over the world and lost everything, even who they are and their books and their name and their heritage and their everything. Ham still had it. So when they were waking up, they can thank Ham for having it. And then for Shem, my opinion is that Shem kept the heart of the covenant. They didn't forget. Does that mean all Shem? No, I'm just saying, as a general rule, the tribes, these 2,000, 3,000 language groups and tribes, kept the heart of the covenant alive. So are they Gentiles? Yes, some are. Maybe almost all are, mixed in with some Israelite. No problem. Just as I am not Israelite. But that if you look back at the Stuart kings, and that's my last name, yes, some of them were they were called black kings. They had African tendencies. They're called black, right? Now they've been whitewashed as well. And I thank Caramael for that book that he read about. That was fascinating. But just to remember that maybe I have half of 1% of my blood is of Israel. Who knows? And like I said in my last video, I don't care. I'm happy just being a Gentile and doing the Gentile thing. And I think for the people of Shem, be grateful for the fathers you do have. And be grateful, to be honest, that your fathers weren't Judah, Simeon, and all those guys, right? Because they were not terribly righteous men. Now, over time, there were some that became righteous, like Caleb and Joshua. But even of the 12 that they sent down into the land, only 2 of them came back and gave a good report. The other 10, I'm not going to say they were wicked, but they certainly weren't righteous. They did not see that God could protect them, and they had no faith. So they said, no, there's giants in the land, and we can't go down there. So I think when we think of Israel, now we have the Bible, and we think, because of Jesus coming through that lineage, which was promised to Abraham, that they were all righteous. And they weren't. Were they all wicked? No, they weren't. They were like the rest of us, some of this and some of that. But I think if we can start to just love our ancestors and be grateful for them, that would be great. Just so you know, I have started a little community thing. It's not expensive. If you can't afford it, just let me know and I'll get you in there one way or another. But I've started a little membership down in the join button down below if you're interested in joining that. And I'm putting up, I'm going to try daily to try to put up a member only, a map or something I'm looking at, and people are interested in commenting there and giving me your opinions. I'd appreciate it, and appreciate the help with with doing this work. Anyway, if you want to join that'd be wonderful and good to have you with me. And if you just want to watch the videos, they'll always be free. I'm not putting any videos behind paywalls and that kind of stuff. I think the information is the information, but if anybody feels like they'd like to help out, I would be much appreciated. And maybe I can get a new mic. Anyway, thank you for all you do. I'm going to put here a video that you might enjoy, and another one I'm just going to link back to the video I just did on the covenant of Abraham and the covenant of Adam. Anyway, talk to you soon and have a good day. Bye-bye.